Welcome, engineers, to the Knights Open Circuit, IEEE UCF's official podcast. As always, our hosts are Brian Smith and Fernando Oriundo. Today on the show, we have Joshua Khani from NEI Electrical Power Engineering. Josh is a power systems engineer that's been working with NEI over the last 8 years. He studied his undergrad degree at Florida State University in electrical engineering, his master's degree at Colorado University Boulder in telecommunications. He has a professional engineering license and is a member of IEEE PES. Welcome to the show, Josh.
Thanks, Alex. Happy to be here.
Host, you could take it away.
Yeah, thank you so much, Josh, for being part of the show. I guess the first thing for us and our guests, I mean, what is your role at NEI? What are you interested in? What do you do?
Yeah, so I'm a power systems engineer at NEI Electric Power Engineering. So we're a consulting firm that operates kind of throughout the power systems industry. We do consulting, which I think we could dig into that word a little bit, design, and we are often the engineer of record for projects. So within the company, I work with a 5-person team. I guess if we count Alex as an intern, call it maybe 5 1/4 person team. And I am in the renewable part of the company. And so I work primarily in the renewable energy space.
Very nice. Hey, you mentioned consulting. So you want to dive into that just a little bit?
Yeah, I think it's worth mentioning. So I actually I've worked only at NEI for my whole career, which is about 8 years. And then I did 2 internships in college at a couple different engineering consulting firms. And I learned pretty early on the word consultant in engineering is used a little more broadly than in other industries. And often consultant is someone with maximum experience who gives advice to somebody else. That's kind of the general use of the term. And in engineering, we give a decent amount of advice where we're kind of guiding our clients in the right direction. But a lot of consultants and engineering consulting is just design work where you are actually doing detailed design and providing the client with a starting place for construction or manufacturing. So I think it's worth pointing out because a lot of people hear the word consulting or consultant and think you need 20 plus years of experience to get started, but consulting firms do hire entry-level consultants.
That's very good to know. Yeah. So you're not like this all-wise engineer trying to gift your knowledge to someone else. It's like a team with somebody who may not know as much about engineering, but you're still working together.
Correct. Yeah. We try and be as wise as we can, but yeah, I like to think of it as about 10% of our time is spent actually giving advice, and the rest is hands-on design or troubleshooting or things like that.
So how's your team formatted then? You say you have 5 1/4. So how's everyone fit into it?
Yeah, we have people of various levels of experience, but it's fairly flat in the sense that I lead the team and then everybody kind of works together towards the common project goal. And so I will take projects and assign them specifically to people who are more experienced and can handle that level of project. And then tasks will get delegated from there kind of out to whoever can handle it. We also do a variety of different topics. We try not to do the same thing over and over again. And so on a given project, I might have 5 or 6 tasks that are very different. And, maybe Alex has experience with, certain things he can do very well. So he'll get started on a slice of a project and somebody else will maybe be more responsible for the bigger picture stuff. So it's a little ad hoc, kind of as needed.
Yeah.
Very nice.
So the teams are like interchangeable, or like it's like the same group for like different projects each time as the projects get finished?
Within our group, we're fairly interchangeable. Our group tends to get a certain type of project, and so we will gain experience and efficiencies. Like for example, we do a lot of renewable interconnections, and those will start to look the same, be for the same client. Maybe some are wind, some are solar. Maybe we'll do a string of wind projects in a row, and so we can kind of specialize in that sense. But in general, there are multiple groups within NEI who can do the same thing. And then there are groups who specialize. So we have a SCADA group that does exclusively SCADA, which allows them to take on larger SCADA projects, more complicated SCADA projects, and act as subject matter experts in certain situations. We have a studies group that focuses on, analysis, kind of that leads into the consulting. And we have a transmission line group that focuses only on transmission lines because they're kind of a unique system, just since they're 50 to 100 miles and kind of have their own parameters.
That's really cool to know that opportunity is there. You mentioned SCADA, you mentioned transition line, the specializations. I do want to get into that, but before we get to that point, our group, our predominant demographic for the show are college kids. And you mentioned a little bit earlier about how it's a little bit the team, that there's a level of flatness to the team, the work, the distribution. As somebody who's a team lead, how do you feel, people in college looking at leads being intimidated, looking at leads being like, oh, this person, I have to act a certain way, be a certain way, and present myself to this person because they are the lead. Like, what would you say to somebody like that walking into the group?
That's a tough one. I mean, to some degree, that's on the manager to break that barrier and, make people feel comfortable. I've found that I tend to advise people that, you got to get used to the discomfort. I've had multiple people tell me, I've been doing this for a year. I still kind of feel like I'm in over my head, or it's, I don't get it. And, my response to those people is that's how it's going to feel. It's a hard job. It's a hard industry. I mean, you're all in college. You're used to, failing tests that maybe you thought you had under control, or maybe you knew you didn't have it under control. But point is, it's going to be hard. And that's why you're making money. And well, maybe that's why you get your degree. And so, you got to kind of live in that space of discomfort. But as far as personalities go and, acting a certain way around your boss, I think it's kind of on the managers to make people feel comfortable. And I've seen that go both ways. NEI is a very comforting place, for lack of a better term. The managers, they'll come hang out and we all have a very good relationship. But you could certainly see situations where it goes the other way, where, managers come in too hot or are too standoffish, and it's hard to get past those problems. They kind of fester and you have to solve them.
Yeah, I'm sure that's a hard balance to keep as a manager or team lead, professional level of like, we need to get this job done, but also I don't want you to feel alienated while we're in a team together. Like,
yeah, and that's a tough one. I mean, I come in very job focused. I'll skip the small talk and jump right to the project. And sometimes that catches people off guard. And, like I said, it's kind of on me to maybe back off on that and come up with a different approach. And I guess I would also advise people coming in that, everybody's trying to figure this out. Like when I've been a manager for probably less than a year now, so I'm just starting to figure it out. So definitely keep that in mind. Your superiors are people who are just trying to, fake it till you make it applies all the way to the end.
Oh yeah, we're all just humans, and engineering's hard. I think we can
We're
all agree
we're
on
just
that.
engineers. That's another thing I'll point out. We're all engineers, so I think people tend to cut each other slack on the social skills side.
Yeah.
Everybody is about the projects.
That's good to know.
Do you always want to do power or not really?
You're asking, did I always want to?
Yeah, like your whole journey from college. Because I know when it first started, even now, I'm still not really sure. I'm in the comprehensive path because electrical has so many fields you can go into.
Yeah, I certainly didn't. Oh, I certainly didn't want to do power. I went out of my way to take some power classes in undergrad to get some exposure to it. It didn't suck me in undergrad. I found those classes to be kind of challenging and, maybe harder than they were interesting. And so I ended up on a pretty heavy communications path. I did a lot of digital communications, analog communications, and then my master's degree was a telecommunications degree. And what happened to me was telecommunications became useful to the power industry, and I got kind of sucked back in that direction because of my telecom degree, weirdly enough.
Hey, do you?
Go ahead.
I was gonna say, do you feel that was beneficial to now gearing a little closer to like smart grid, SCADA? If you'd like to explain some of those terms for the audience, and kind of talk about, did you feel your communications degree ended up giving you a leg up in that field with the data information side of it, or was it a complete left turn?
Yeah, well, it was certainly a turn. I would start by saying it definitely gave me a leg up in the sense that I only got the job at NEI because of my telecommunications degree. I was not a graduate from the Colorado School of Mines, which is where, everybody at this company had come from. And so I was told explicitly, your telecom degree is kind of what we're looking for to add to our repertoire, and so we'll make an exception and we'll hire you. I was told you should probably take some classes at the School of Mines so you can catch up with your peers. And that's where the left turn came in, because I did end up as like an old school traditional power systems engineer, which was not what I thought I was signing up for. So, it took many turns and it ended up here. And looking back, it's pretty obvious how I ended up here, but you got to kind of go with the flow.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. So yeah, do you want to dive into a little bit about SCADA?
Yeah, I can give some color on that. And so essentially the power systems industry from Edison until recently was very analog, transformers, transmission lines, rotating machines, and analog loads like lights. So as the industry progressed, there started to be an increased need for controls and remote controls. And so the grid went from kind of operating itself to having a need for more hands-on controls. And that's kind of where SCADA comes from. SCADA essentially means monitoring and control of physical systems. In the cybersecurity industry, they call it the cyber physical interface. And so it's essentially a digital control system that ends up taking physical actions on the grid and observing physical data on the grid. So once you start adding data, controls, graphical interfaces, we call them HMIs, but they're essentially GUIs to control the grid, you start to have a lot of data flow requirements, which introduces a need for telecommunications and networking. So all that to say, the introduction of SCADA created a need for power systems engineers who understand telecommunications. And that need became pretty public. Everybody realized it. NEI realized it, and that's what allowed me into the industry. We kind of created a space for that.
Very cool. Do you think, again, for people at home, the power that is generated is received and used almost instantaneously from the moment it is generated, and therefore everything that is produced needs to also be what is used, or it is wasted. Obviously, with information, data takes a little time to transmit, et cetera, et cetera. Do you find that that has been a problem? Because analog's a bit more, in my understanding, analog's a bit more instantaneous. You don't have to worry about the computation time. You don't have to worry about the processing side of that. Have you found issues to be occurring, or you think it's been just an awesome transition into, awesome transition? Digital.
I think awesome transition is a good description. To say there's been no problems would be obviously ridiculous, but I would say there's been no problems that weren't able to be engineered around. So when I was in my master's program, so this was 8 or 9 years ago, there was a rule of thumb that if renewable generation got above 33%, the control systems wouldn't be able to handle it and everything would be out of whack. And that was a theory, a paranoia, I would say, that's been blown out of the water. So, when the penetration gets higher, call it 60, 70, or 100%, there have been problems, certainly, but we don't see it. I mean, the grid operates and we're dramatically installing, these renewable systems that they respond pretty quickly. They respond pretty quickly.
Very cool.
But as far as load matching generation, it's a tricky problem because you do have to control the generation. You can't really control the load. The load is what it is. It's hard to shut customers off. People try it.
Oh no.
Well, you see it in California. They're shutting whole pieces of the grid off. But there's also we have saver switches in Colorado where the utility will give you a discount if you let them shut your air conditioner off and things like that. Those are not very popular. So you have to meet that generation instantaneously. So I can give an example. We use the term curtailment mostly in the wind industry to mean when the balancing authority that controls the grid is shutting off or reducing your output. And they do that over SCADA. And so for a new project, I have to implement the SCADA system that gives the utility and the balancing authority the information they need to make that decision. And then I also have to give them controls to be able to shut that off on the fly. And then give the owner the option to block that if they need to for maintenance reasons. And so that's all additional work that didn't exist when you built a substation 15, 20 years ago. So not a big deal. I do it, we built a company to do that work. And so we get it done and it costs everybody a little bit of money and we get through it. And in the end, a curtailment signal can get through. And so it works. And there are curtailment events where the balancing authorities will send out signals to all the wind farms in the area to just back off on generation because we're overproducing in any given moment. So it's worth just being aware that there are people who sit at a desk and manage that, just sit and watch that. I actually did a job interview when I was first job hunting for that position and watched a guy who would just sit at his computer 5 minutes before the top of the hour. He'd make some phone calls, get everything balanced, hit okay. At 12:01, he would start preparing for the top of the next hour to make sure they're balanced.
Oh wow.
Yeah, that's crazy.
yeah, that was a fast-paced job. They're 24/7 shift workers.
And it makes sense. It makes sense. You don't think about that. I mean, a lot of people take power for granted. You just plug in, you plug in a lamp to the wall and you're like, cool, it turns on. Not realizing that although you are just a tiny amount of the power, you are changing the load, the demand that somebody's going to have to adjust for that.
Yep, that's correct. And we all do the same thing at the same time of day. As much as we like to think we're unique. There's probably many podcasts being recorded right at this moment.
I'd believe it.
Me too. So where do you see the power industry going in the future, in like 50 years from now, 20 years from now?
I'd like to think of those as two different questions. Hopefully 20 years from now, we're finishing this project that we're starting right now of converting the grid to renewables. 50 years from now, I think it would be dangerous to try and predict that.
And also, just stemming from that though, so what's your opinion about like this whole, I don't know if it's a controversy or myth about renewable energy being just as causing as much pollution as the other resource that we use? Or keep your take on it.
Sure, yeah, I have opinions on that. I think we could start by acknowledging that human life has costs, and if we think we're gonna use electricity and it's going to have no impact on the environment, we're dreaming. So I think it's worth acknowledging that a wind farm or a solar farm is not as good for the environment as like a field was before the wind farm got there. So I guess unless that field was being heavily farmed, in which case we could talk about that trade-off. But I think it's an issue of trade-offs. So
Yeah.
I think it's worth acknowledging that renewable energy has costs and has environmental costs. But I think it's clear that those costs are dramatically reduced compared to just straight burning of fossil fuels. So, we could play devil's advocate and talk about birds at wind farms or cost of steel, or, personally, I have a pet peeve with the land usage of solar farms. I feel like they are I feel like they consume more property than wind farms do. And so I have a personal concern with solar farm land usage, but comparing that to just straight burning of fossil fuels, I think is not even a fair comparison.
Oh yeah, not to mention the fact that it's called a renewable energy for a reason. Like, we are going to eventually run out of gas, fossil fuels, petroleum. And if we want to have the same, or if we want our kids and our grandkids to have the same luxuries that we do, then I feel personally renewable is a more secure way to go.
Yeah, I agree with that. I also think it's worth noting that we won't ever really be able to get off of fossil fuels entirely. At least we don't have a path forward right now to replace plastics, for example, as Fernando drinks from a bottle. So we will always need to use fossil fuels. And so I think it makes a lot of sense to reserve them and use them as sparingly as possible. So if we can stop burning them and use them only for plastics and, maybe kickstarting our processes, that to me seems like a smart move just from a financial place.
Oh yeah, start relying on even just the idea of relying on more than just a single resource, just expanding our options. And on that note, do you have a favorite form of renewable energy?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, like I said, I'm partial to wind over solar, mostly because of the land usage. And I think that offshore wind is kind of the next level of that, and is the ultimate land usage since you're offshore. So yeah, I'm partial to wind. I mean, I think you might see a lot of people answer storage related responses on that, because batteries are exciting and storage is a critical technology. But I don't know if I can call it my favorite. Kind of back to Fernando's question, batteries are major sources of pollution. So I don't think I could call them my favorite, but they're probably the coolest right now.
Pretty awesome being able to take power wherever you go.
Do you
Yep.
see renewable energy being implemented into like newer technology? Like for example, an electric car, maybe like a calculator that has solar panels in it.
Yes, you certainly see it. And there's a whole industry around solar farms on top of commercial buildings, those sorts of integrations. Personally, I don't predict that to be the future. And then I also just kind of believe that centralized renewable energy works well and is most efficient. And then currently, like you were saying before, people turn on their lights and they expect the power to come out, and they maybe cut a $10 check and move on with their lives. So to go from that paradigm to now you need to produce your own power, you need to store your own power, you need to maintain a solar farm on your roof or in your calculator or in your windows is a big one. They want to put them on the sides of sides of buildings for windows. And my opinion is it's unlikely that you'd be able to purchase and operate that system more efficiently than we can at the utility scale. So I think we can solve a lot of our renewable related problems at the utility scale and not burden consumers, homeowners, vehicle owners with those types of challenges.
That makes sense. It's very cool. And then just on that note, this idea of smart grid, it's a combination of the industry mixed with personal usage. Being able to provide your own power back to the smart grid if you need to, but you also have the opportunity to rely on the industry, which I think is great because now people have the choice whether or not they want to be burdened by that. Because I know, like me personally, I would be perfectly fine putting solar panels, putting wind farms, whatever around my house, but not everyone's up to that. And that's where I love the idea of smart grids because it kind of works for everyone.
Agreed. I'm the same way. I would be happy to put a substation in my backyard and it wouldn't bother me.
The reason why I like the idea of having like tiny solar panels on commercial items is so it could be a hybrid, more of a case. Let's say like my battery dies, during an exam, then like I back up, just go for it,
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and there's uses. I mean, we see that application anytime you have a load that's more than 600-700 feet from the rest of the distribution system. You'll put a little tiny solar panel with a little battery. There's like some standard packages you can buy for standalone power on a pole for single applications, like you're saying. Maybe you have a light. Like I have a situation where we have a light on a dock that is 2,000 feet from the edge of the solar farm, and they want to light the dock. And so my choices are run cable 2,000 feet or buy a little solar panel battery package that can provide 24-hour load or 24-hour supply to the local load. We're good to go.
All right. It's definitely it's interesting to hear about those decisions that you have to make. And just referencing this idea of, because you mentioned earlier that batteries are obviously very much, they are a pollutant. They're also, my understanding is they're not the most efficient forms of energy storage. They're not just the most efficient form of energy. Obviously they store things. I lost my train of thought here.
Well, as far as you make a good point about storage efficiency, right? There's various levels of, power in, power out, just conservation of energy happening. But then you have to add in the economic efficiencies. And so from what we've seen, there's batteries. Batteries are what is most efficient financially. And that takes into account the losses from conservation of energy or lack thereof. And so I just think, I guess it's pretty clear to me that batteries are the most efficient because they're the only ones that I've seen actively implemented in, non-pilot projects, commercial scale projects. So I do think there's others that are, like you're saying, likely to be the future because they're more efficient. But I'm just not sure that we're there yet with non-battery storage technologies.
Do you see the progression of smart grids including more storage on the, I want to say lower level, the more populous level, the more individual side of things? Do you find it to be more of a push on that storing of the energy or having the people generate that energy similar to the industry, just constantly pumping it out and trying to level it as you go?
I think typically on the consumer level, generation comes first, because if you're off grid or your reliability is bad, then maybe you would be interested in starting with batteries or some sort of storage. But typically, if your reliability is bad, you don't trust the generation either. And so you would start by saying, well, let me get some solar panels and a battery.
I see.
Or if you're in a place where power is reliable, you might want solar panels to take advantage of a tax credit or to sell power back. And then once you get that solar panel or start designing that system, you might realize the benefits of a battery and then kind of incorporate it at that point. So I guess it's hard for me to see a consumer-driven need for batteries only without being coupled with generation.
That makes sense.
But there are applications, and the best application, the easiest application to conceptualize is if you have a city that is on the other side of a transmission line, far from a generation source. Typically, the only way to get more power to that load center is by increasing the capacity of your transmission line, which has a very specific cost that you can quantify. And so if the cost of adding batteries at the far end of that transmission line is less than the cost of that transmission line upgrade, that's like a very clear need where a battery would solve your problem by balancing peaks and troughs of the load profile. But again, utility scale, I guess it's hard for me to see great use cases at the consumer level. Probably just a function of where I operate.
I find it really interesting how knowledgeable you are about power. I mean, yeah, it's your career, but you start from signals. So at what point, like, was it during your job, or was it like during your master's degree that you became more knowledgeable in this? Because I think undergrad, I know my stuff, but I don't think I don't know as much as I would like to know. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think I would credit my grad program pretty heavily with some of my higher level understanding, because like you're saying, you're deep in the weeds
Yeah.
as a student, but you're also deep in the weeds as a practicing engineer. And so my graduate program, which was only 2 years, we did spend quite a bit of time just talking and thinking about the industry, kind of the way it's regulated and the economics behind it, as well as the evolution of the technology. And I guess just having some time to step back and think like that, when I got into the industry, it allowed me to have a better understanding of what's going on. A lot of times, an entity will just come in and make a request and ask for it by Friday. And so now we're scrambling to meet some request. And you don't ever necessarily get to know why are they asking that, who is even asking that, how important is it? Mm-hmm. And a lot of times I can tie these things back to just things I learned in grad school. So I'd have to give the telecommunications program some credit there for that one.
So it was
Seems-
during your master's that you changed your mindset, or do you always think this way even during your undergrad?
I think the grad program helps change how you think, for sure. I mean, my grad program was a little unique in the sense that it was telecommunications. It was also interdisciplinary, so they did make an effort to teach us regulatory topics and economic topics. So certainly not everybody's going to get that exact experience in grad school. But it's tough. It's tough. And a lot of it comes during conversations. Like, so you'll see people in industry ask the question, like, why is this person making this request? And then everybody will take a step back and talk a little bit about the concepts. And that's kind of how learning happens once you're out of the classroom.
Do you find yourself abstracting like that a lot, as in taking these individual problems and applying them to a greater scale?
Yeah, mostly because we try and always seem smarter on the next project than we did on the last one. As consultants, we're just trying to, expand our skills and understanding. And so, yeah, if you're just responding to project requirements and not trying to understand where they come from or why, you will end up scrambling to meet those same requirements on the next one.
That makes sense, and that's I think a good just general piece of advice for the people listening. Like try to remember the bigger picture. Why are you here? What are you doing? And how can you take this as a lesson every time?
Yeah, and that applies to the whole industry too. I mean, certainly you feel like you're in the renewable industry when you're in the renewable industry, and that politicians are talking about your projects when they're hyping renewable projects, and it has it does impact the whole psyche, because I spent some time in oil and gas, and you feel like you're in the oil and gas industry.
So did you go straight from your master's to NEI, or were there some in between steps?
Straight through for me.
Nice.
But what was interesting for me is that NEI changed. So I had my career changed as the company changed. And so when I first got to NEI, there was a big push to move into oil and gas, and I joined that push, did a few years of mostly oil and gas projects. And while I was doing those projects, that industry was, I like to say going away, although obviously it's still there. And the renewable industry took off. So when I was doing my oil and gas projects, NEI was spending a year on one wind farm. And then 2 years later, we did another wind farm. And now we do, 30 at a time.
Oh, wow.
That's incredible.
So I got sucked into that as well, where, here's an oil and gas project, now it's done. Here's the next project, happens to be a solar farm. Next project, all renewable.
That's really awesome.
So it's a full career change without having to go anywhere.
And did you feel, you mentioned your psyche, did you feel you've had an overall, psychological improvement going from oil and gas to renewable?
I did, yeah. When I was in the oil and gas industry and people asked me what I did for a living, I would tell them I poked holes in the ground.
Oh no, yeah, that's fair.
So yeah, it's nice to be, first of all, it's nice to be in a growing industry, and certainly little luck of the draw for that. But it's equivalent to like people in Silicon Valley in the 90s, right? That was a great place to be. Those people had a lot of fun. So it's nice to be in a growing industry. But it's nice to be in an industry that you believe in, the kind of the mission of the industry. And I guess maybe it's a little early to say this, but it's nice to be on the right side of history as the renewable push becomes just standard procedure.
Oh yeah.
Would you ever see yourself going back to signals, or is it power all the way now?
I think it's power all the way, because also It's hard to change. It was a big lift for me to get comfortable in the power space. I had to take some extra, I had to go back to grad school, take some grad level classes just to kind of catch up with my peers. And so, I would encourage people to be comfortable with transitions because it's very achievable. But yeah, it's not something you would do unless something pulled you pulled you away from it. But I guess I never really answered your question when you asked if I use my telecom degree or if I see it, and I do. So I don't feel like I have a lack of exposure to communications topics. I spend a lot of time in the telecom and SCADA space.
In my
cool.
personal experience, I've always, speaking to professionals, they always tell me to either go for your master's in business, your MBA, or don't go for anything at all. Do you like agree with that or like disagreeing with that? Like, because I feel like getting your master's in electrical when you specialize in something, that just means that you're passionate about it.
Yeah, so I disagree with that. I think certainly it's not a bad career move to go back and get an MBA or something to that effect. I could point to some very successful people within NEI who've done that. But my personal opinion is kind of what you were saying, Fernando. It's almost, there's a lot to be said for doubling down on your chosen profession and gaining, more technical skills. Personally, I have a higher respect for technical degrees than non-technical degrees, and in a world that's full of engineers and engineering students, I assume I'm not the only one who feels that way. And I definitely wouldn't say do an MBA or not at all. I would say it's certainly a good option, but there's value in the higher degrees. I would say don't sell the higher degrees short. Don't sell the licenses short. Those things matter.
Yeah, you mentioned in your graduate experience that you did talk a good amount about economics, about the more logistic side beyond just installing a piece of equipment or working on some system.
Yeah, it's a good perspective to see. And without that, yeah, I don't know that I would ever sit down and look at these higher level topics if it wasn't forced to happen in school. I can give a concrete example of that. I learned in school in my master's program to go to the EIA International Energy Agency, IEA website to get generation data. And every now and then I'd go to that website and kind of see how the industry is doing. And poking around before this podcast, it prompted me to go back to that website and just pull those numbers again. And that's a skill that I would never on my own. Obviously, I could figure out how to find that information and pull it into a spreadsheet and look at it. But I was primed to do that by my degree.
Oh yeah. And you just mentioned, you're looking at the generation numbers. So do you work, there are three parts of the power system, to my understanding, which is the generation, the transmission, and the distribution. Where do you mostly lie in your line of work?
So as a company, we operate in all three of those spaces. But within the renewable group, we are working mostly at the point of interconnection between the renewable generation and the grid. So kind of in between generation and transmission. We will often do a lot of work inside the renewable generation plant. So that's kind of squarely on the generation side. And I do occasionally do electrical design for the transmission line systems. So that's kind of where I operate, from that point in between the two, facing towards generation and facing towards transmission. But we do, and I have worked on many projects at the distribution level on the opposite side of the transmission line, where you're taking that transmission level voltage, stepping it down to a distribution level voltage, and then distributing it out across a variety of distribution lines.
Very nice.
And just to bring it back to the numbers, when I got into the industry in 2013, I guess I don't remember what the percentage was, but from 2013 to now, we've increased the percentage of renewables by 4%. And so that's actually quite a bit of generation that has been, as coal plants and natural gas is retiring, the industry, since I've been involved, has increased that generation mix by 4%. So our hope is to kind of keep doing generation work until that's a much higher penetration than we have right now, which is currently 11%.
Very nice. Well, I assume that probably means as it's continuing to grow, you may need more and more people on the team. So I know we mentioned earlier about NEI looking around for more people to join. Is that an accurate statement to make?
Yeah, I would say the whole industry is hiring. I've seen, so NEI has gone from 30 people to over 130 people since I joined.
Oh, wow.
And what's interesting is not so much our growth, but the growth of our clients. I've seen, companies that were just coming together and starting in the industry now absorbing other companies, and just everybody is experiencing some form of exponential growth, whether it's growth in how many solar farms you own or growth in how many substations you work on. So the whole industry is hiring. And I would encourage people, if they're interested, to, reach out, send applications, find your angle to the renewable industry and take it, because you might be surprised how friendly it can be.
That's so awesome.
Oh. Do you have any advice for students that are looking to get into the power industry?
Yeah, I think, like I said, I mentioned this briefly, but my main piece of advice as you enter the industry in general is to kind of go with the flow. I've seen people do real damage to their career by setting goals for themselves and working very hard to manipulate the situation to try and achieve those goals.
Mm.
And I just think you're best off, keep your head down, work hard, and take the opportunities that are in front of you. Don't try too much to cherry pick or manipulate your situation. And then I guess kind of contradictory to that, I would say, throw out applications. Don't wait. Find an angle, send an application, send me an application, and see what you hear back. I think because the industry is expanding, I think you'll find that people are responding and making offers.
That's so cool. And then just on that note, any shout outs, any comments you want to make about, LinkedIn, etc.? Drop anything in the description.
No, I guess I would say certainly you can check out NEI's website as far as open positions. We also have a interview podcast, for lack of better terms, kind of similar to this one, probably has similarly low number of episodes, kind of just getting started. So if you're looking for more content, that's there. And we certainly are looking for people. I've had a good experience with, Alex that I hired from your IEEE chapter. So I think we're certainly, it sounds like you guys got a good group down there, and happy to talk to more IEEE members, that's for sure. Very
cool. Well, I think that's about the time we have. I'm going to drop in a little question was sent to us. Maybe this is a fun way to go out. What is a super exciting technology that you are ready for this world to accept in the renewable energy system?
Well, I guess when you say super exciting, it makes it a little challenging because
Oh.
it's hard for more work to seem exciting, but I'm mostly interested in offshore wind,
Yeah.
keeping a close eye on that because I think that's going to have a big impact on the type of work that I do. And so it's exciting because in Europe and in other places in the world, they're moving pretty quickly. And so you can see the technology in action. And at the same time, we have none here. I think there's one project under construction. I think there was one pilot project maybe 4 or 5 years ago, but essentially we have no offshore wind. And so that's all just out there waiting for us to install it. So I'm keeping a close eye on offshore wind.
Very cool. Very, very cool. You heard it here first, folks. Keep your eye out for offshore.
It's coming. Yeah. Send your applications to whoever's doing the offshore wind. That's my advice.
All right, yeah, thank you, Josh, for coming in. As always, it's always a pleasure to hear from you. And thank you, Fern and Brian, as well, for the good conversation. Good thought-provoking stuff.
Yeah, I appreciate it, guys. It was a good time.
All right, yeah, so if you guys are interested in our other episodes, check them out. But otherwise, we're going to wrap this up. Again, thank you guys, and peace out.
Thanks, guys. Talk to you later.
Talk to you later.
See you guys.